For 24 years, she silenced attorneys and destroyed lives, until one man flipped the script and had her arrested in her own courtroom. The air inside the Jefferson County Courthouse was thick, not from the humidity outside, but from something heavier, something unspoken. It was the kind of weight that settled deep in the walls after decades of complicity. Everyone who stepped through those massive oak doors knew exactly how things worked in the courtroom of Judge Evelyn Rockwell. She was the kind of judge who rarely reached for her reading glasses. Her sharp, penetrating eyes cut through attorneys like they were nothing more than minor irritants. She spoke in an even tone, never raising her voice, but the authority she commanded crushed anyone who dared to challenge her. For 24 years, Evelyn Rockwell presided from the bench, long enough to leave a legacy. Not the kind etched into plaques or lauded by law schools, but the kind whispered about in hushed tones in law firm corridors and quietly dissected at bar association meetings. Lawyers, especially black attorneys, knew exactly what to do when their cases landed in her courtroom. The rulings always seemed to lean in one direction. The objections she sustained, or overruled, followed a pattern no one could prove, but everyone understood. And today, that pattern was about to be tested. Malcolm Reese stepped into the courtroom, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. He had been here before, but today was different. He wasn't just another defense attorney standing before Judge Rockwell. He wasn't just another name on her docket. Today, he had something she didn't see coming. Malcolm was 48 years old, a man who had built his career on taking cases nobody else wanted. His reputation stretched far beyond Alabama, and his ability to dismantle the prosecution's case had made him a target for people like Evelyn Rockwell. But that had never stopped him. What caught him for just a moment, though, was the look in her eyes as he approached the defense table. She already hated him, not because of the case, not because of anything he'd said, but because he was Malcolm Reese. He felt the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders. It wasn't just about his client, Marcus Bell, a man falsely accused of armed robbery. It wasn't just about proving innocence. It was about something far bigger. And Malcolm had no intention of leaving this courtroom without making that clear. "Mr. Reese," Judge Rockwell said, barely acknowledging him as she scanned the paperwork on her bench. "You're already skating on thin ice in my courtroom. Don't waste my time today." There was no reason for her to say it. He hadn't even spoken yet. Malcolm tightened his grip on his briefcase, but kept his face unreadable. "I'll do my best, Your Honor." Rockwell gave a thin smile. "Good. I have a full docket and no patience for theatrics." She turned to the prosecution, a young assistant district attorney named Grant Holloway, fresh out of law school and far too eager to impress the wrong people. "The state is ready, Your Honor," Holloway said, shooting a smug glance in Malcolm's direction. Of course they were ready. They always were in her courtroom. Marcus Bell sat beside Malcolm, leaning forward, hands clasped, head bowed. The kind of posture that belonged to a man who had been through the system long enough to see too much, hear too much, and lose even more. Malcolm leaned in slightly. "We're ready," he said, loud enough for the entire room to hear. Judge Rockwell sighed through her nose. "Let's get this over with." The trial began, but it wasn't a trial. It was a performance, and Judge Rockwell was the star of the show. Every objection Malcolm raised was dismissed with barely a thought. Every time Grant Holloway stumbled through a legal argument, Rockwell guided him like a teacher correcting a favorite student. The jury noticed. The gallery noticed. But no one was brave enough to say anything. No one but Malcolm. He watched her. The way her lips curled in contempt when he spoke. The way she barely hid her disdain. This wasn't just bias. It was something worse. Something he had spent years preparing for. But the courtroom didn't know that yet. Malcolm had been in hostile courtrooms before. But this was different. Judge Rockwell wasn't even trying to hide it. Every time he spoke, she cut him off. Every time he made a valid argument, she swatted away like a fly buzzing near her ear. The courtroom had its own rhythm. Lawyers spoke. Judges ruled. Jurors listened. But in this courtroom, Rockwell had rendered her judgment long before the trial ever began. Malcolm could feel the discomfort ripple through the jury, the way they shifted in their seats. Even some of the more hardened jurors, who may have come in with their own prejudices, couldn't ignore what was happening. But Rockwell didn't care. She doubled down. Her words got sharper every time she addressed him. "Mr. Reese, you are testing my patience. Mr. Reese, one more frivolous objection and I'll hold you in contempt. Mr. Reese, this is not a lecture hall. If you want a grandstand, do it somewhere else." Malcolm kept his expression calm, but inside his blood boiled. Not because she insulted him. He could handle that. But because she was making it personal. And that was her mistake. He needed her to keep talking, to keep exposing herself. And Judge Rockwell did exactly that. Jurors exchanged glances. Reporters scribbled furiously. Everyone could feel it now, the shift, the slow unraveling of a judge who had grown too comfortable in her own power. But Rockwell didn't relent. She sat straighter in her chair, her voice ice cold. "Mr. Holloway, proceed with your witness." Grant Holloway cleared his throat, clearly rattled. He was young, but he wasn't stupid. He saw what was happening. "Yes, Your Honor," he said, turning to the witness stand. An elderly shopkeeper with trembling hands sat there. "Mr. Sanders, can you confirm that the defendant is the man you saw at the scene of the robbery?" The old man hesitated. Malcolm leaned forward. He'd seen that kind of hesitation before, the kind that meant someone wasn't as sure as they thought they were supposed to be. Judge Rockwell wasn't interested in hesitation. "Answer the question, sir." The witness flinched. I think so," he said finally. Malcolm was on his feet immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. That's not a definitive statement." Rockwell didn't even pause. "Overruled." Malcolm exhaled slowly, shaking his head just enough for the jurors to notice. He let Holloway ask a few more questions before rising for cross-examination. He approached the witness stand with deliberate calm. "Mr. Sanders," Malcolm said softly, "you said you think you saw my client that night. How certain are you?" The man licked his lips. I thought I saw him. But you're not sure." Before the witness could answer, Rockwell cut in. "Move along, Mr. Reese." Malcolm slowly turned his head toward her. It was too much. Too obvious. "I'd like the witness to answer, Your Honor." I said move along. Malcolm didn't blink. "For the record, Your Honor, you are preventing the witness from clarifying his own testimony." Rockwell's jaw twitched. "You are on thin ice, Mr. Reese." He smiled faintly. "Understood, Your Honor." He turned back to the witness. No further questions. He returned to the defense table slowly, feeling the energy in the room tighten, coil. Rockwell knew she was losing control. Malcolm knew it was time. Because he wasn't here just to win this case. He was here to end her. His fingers brushed over a file in his briefcase, the one that would change everything. And just as he was about to bring it out, the courtroom doors swung open. What happened next, Evelyn Rockwell never saw coming. The heavy double doors groaned open, and the sound alone shifted every gaze in the courtroom. 2 federal agents, dressed in dark suits, strode in, their movements crisp and deliberate. Silence swallowed the room. Malcolm didn't react. He simply smoothed his tie and folded his hands neatly on the table. Judge Rockwell's eyes flickered, confusion, then irritation. What is the meaning of this? One of the agents, a tall man with a lean frame, held up a badge as he spoke. "Judge Evelyn Rockwell, we need to speak with you." Immediately, her jaw tightened. "I am in the middle of a trial. It's urgent." Malcolm saw it then, the flicker of something dangerously close to fear in her eyes, quickly buried beneath the mask of judicial arrogance. But there. "This is highly inappropriate," she snapped. "Whatever it is, it can wait until I finish this proceeding." The second agent stepped forward. "This is a matter of federal interest. It cannot wait." Murmurs spread through the gallery. Even the jurors, sworn to impartiality, couldn't hide their curiosity. Grant Holloway cleared his throat awkwardly. "Shall we take a recess, Your Honor?" Rockwell's fingers curled into fists. "No," she said sharply. We are not taking a recess. The defense has wasted enough of this court's time. The lead agent interrupted. We have a warrant for your arrest. A collective gasp swept the room. For the first time in 24 years, Judge Evelyn Rockwell lost control of her courtroom. Malcolm let the moment breathe. Let the weight of it sink into every corner of the room. Then, slowly, deliberately, he stood. He turned to face the jury, the gallery, the reporters scribbling frantically. Finally, he faced Rockwell. Your Honor, he said quietly, I believe you just denied my motion for a mistrial. But it seems you now have far bigger concerns. Her face paled. The lead agent stepped forward again, pulling a folded document from his jacket. You are under arrest for bribery, abuse of power, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations under federal law. The room exploded. Voices rose, shock, outrage, disbelief. Some were silent, too stunned to speak. The jurors sat frozen, their eyes darting between Malcolm and Rockwell. For the first time, she really saw him. Not just another lawyer arguing a case, but the man who had been waiting for this moment. Mr. Reese, her voice was no longer sharp. It was uncertain. Malcolm picked up his briefcase and stepped closer. I told you, he said, his tone calm and steady. I follow the law, even when the law fails people like me. The lead agent gestured to the bench. Judge, we need you to stand. She didn't move. Then finally she did. And as the agents cuffed her hands behind her back, the courtroom didn't just watch. They bore witness to a reckoning. But it wasn't over. The click of the handcuffs echoed through the room, sharp, final. For 24 years, Judge Evelyn Rockwell had ruled that courtroom with an iron grip. Lawyers feared her. Defendants knew they didn't stand a chance. The system had protected her, turned a blind eye to her rulings, her biases, her thinly veiled contempt for people like Malcolm Reese. But now, she stood exactly where she had sentenced countless men before her. Wrist cuffed, eyes desperate. The power in the courtroom was electric, a once-in-a-lifetime moment. No one expected to see it. The jury, the gallery, even Grant Holloway, the young prosecutor so eager to please her, sat in stunned silence. Malcolm let it hang there. He had worked years for this, gathering every piece of evidence, following every bribe, every unethical decision, every manipulated case, playing the long game, knowing one day the weight of her corruption would be too heavy to ignore. And today was that day. The lead agent read the charges aloud again. Evelyn Rockwell, you're charged with multiple violations of the Civil Rights Act, bribery, obstruction of justice, and abuse of judicial authority. You have the right to remain silent. She finally found her voice. This is outrageous, she hissed. The agent didn't blink. You can discuss that with your attorney. Reporters scrambled to capture every detail. The way Rockwell's hand shook, the way her once imposing presence now seemed so small. She turned to Malcolm, her voice a mixture of rage and disbelief. This is your doing. Malcolm lifted his chin. This is justice. For the first time in his career, the scales had tipped. Rockwell tried to steel herself, but it was useless. The power she had wielded for so long was gone. The agents led her toward the doors, but not before one last humiliation. A bailiff, someone who had worked under her for years, who had once unquestioningly obeyed her authority, held the door open for her like she was just another defendant. She hesitated, then stepped through. The doors closed behind her, and just like that, she was gone. The courtroom sat in stunned silence, the weight of what had just happened settling over them all. Malcolm exhaled slowly. Resting his hands on the defense table, he turned to his client, Marcus Bell. Marcus shook his head, still in shock. "Man, I didn't think people like her ever paid for what they did." Malcolm glanced at the empty bench. "They do," he said quietly. "Eventually." But the lesson wasn't over. The courtroom had never felt so alive. Conversations broke out, whispers of disbelief, satisfaction, vindication. The jurors glanced at each other, silently acknowledging that they had all just witnessed the same thing. Malcolm remained still. He had fought battles in court before, but this was different. He had played the long game, knowing Rockwell's corruption was too deep, too reckless to stay hidden forever. And now justice had come. Yet Marcus Bell still wore handcuffs. Judge Rockwell was gone, but the trial she orchestrated against him was unfinished. Malcolm's gaze shifted to Grant Holloway. The young prosecutor no longer looked confident. Pale, his hands gripped the edges of his notes like a man clinging to wreckage. Malcolm cleared his throat. "Your Honor," he said. The replacement judge, an older black man with silver hair and a reputation for fairness, had just arrived from another courtroom to take over the proceedings. In light of recent developments, Malcolm continued, "The defense moves for immediate dismissal of all charges against my client." The new judge steepled his fingers. "On what grounds, Mr. Reese?" Malcolm addressed the jury. "On the grounds that this entire process was tainted from start. The arrest of Judge Rockwell proves what we've known all along. She was never impartial. This trial was manipulated. Evidence was ignored. And my client was never given a fair chance." He paused, letting his words settle, then turned back to the judge. "And now that the woman who orchestrated this injustice is in handcuffs, the only thing left is to undo the damage she caused." The judge studied Malcolm for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I agree." A heavy silence fell over the courtroom. "Charges against Marcus Bell are dismissed. Bailiff, remove his restraints." For a moment, no one moved. Then Marcus let out a breath he had held for years. The bailiff unlocked his cuffs, and for the first time in a long time, Marcus's hands were his own. The moment was heavy with emotion. Even Grant Holloway didn't object. He simply sat there, staring at his notes like a man who had lost more than a case. Marcus rubbed his wrists, then turned to Malcolm. His voice was quiet. "I don't even know what to say." Malcolm clapped a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to say anything. Today, the system worked. Not because it was built to, but because someone fought to make it." Marcus looked around the courtroom that had almost swallowed him whole. Then, without another word, he walked out. Malcolm followed, the weight of what had just happened pressing on his chest. Because it wasn't just about Marcus Bell. It was about every case Rockwell had ever ruled on. Every innocent man she sent away. Every bribe she took. Every biased ruling she made. This was only the beginning. Malcolm had won today. Tomorrow, he had more work to do. Because there were more Rockwells out there, and he wasn't done yet. If you believe in real justice, if you believe in holding power accountable, don't just watch, make your voice heard. Like, comment, and subscribe.